View of Eureka, Colorado, around 1900, in a colorized image. The manual colorization of historical photographs was common artistic practice in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, allowing the public to imagine these locations in their full vivacity. Eureka was a beautiful example of a mining town high in the Rockies. Interior of a teepee showing kitchen and sleeping areas arranged in a circular pattern from the Yellowstone National Park photo collection. Teepees were ingenious portable structures perfectly adapted to the nomadic life of Plains nations. They could be erected and dismantled in less than an hour by the women of the camp. A rider fills his water barrel at a desert well 30 miles north of Palomas, Arizona, while his horse refreshes nearby in 1907. This everyday scene captures the harsh reality of life in the arid American Southwest, where water was the most precious resource and every stop at a well was vital for survival on the open desert. The Sam DeAngelis Saloon in Park City, Utah, around the early 1910s. Park City was discovered as a silver mining area in 1868 and grew rapidly. At its peak, it had more than 20 active mines. Today, it is known as a world-class ski resort, but its Wild West roots are still very present in the town's identity. The Apache Boy, around 1890. This photograph captures a young man of Apache heritage in his traditional dress. The Apache resisted American colonization with exceptional determination, and even after confinement to reservations, preserved many of their customs and traditions through generations of remarkable cultural resistance. A steam tractor hauling borax at Calico Hills in Southern California around 1900. Borax mining operations in the arid Southern California desert were pioneers in using steam machinery for heavy transport. The extracted borax was shipped to San Bernardino along the famous 20-mule team borax route across the Mojave Desert. Johnny Ringo, the mysterious gunfighter of the Arizona Territory, photographed around 1880. Ringo was known for his above-average intelligence, his education, and his volatile temperament when drinking. He moved in the same circles as Doc Holliday in Tombstone and was found dead under unexplained circumstances in 1882. Buffalo soldiers guarding a Concord stagecoach around 1869. Buffalo soldiers from the 9th and 10th Cavalry Regiments were responsible for protecting stagecoach and mail routes across the Wild West. Concord coaches, manufactured in New Hampshire, were the primary vehicles of passenger transport before the Transcontinental Railroad. Quanah Parker, the great Comanche chief. Son of warrior Peta Nocona and Texas captive Cynthia Ann Parker, Quanah led the Quahati Comanche in resistance until 1875. He then became a successful rancher in Oklahoma and a businessman who negotiated grazing rights for Texas ranchers on reservation lands. Photograph of a pioneer family with their covered wagon during their migration westward in Loup Valley, Nebraska in 1886. Covered wagons, nicknamed prairie schooners, became the symbol of American westward expansion. This family represents the thousands of pioneers who made that grueling and transformative journey. View of Canyon de Chelly, Arizona, in 1904. Canyon de Chelly in northeastern Arizona is one of the most sacred places of the Navajo people. Its red sandstone walls shelter ruins of ancestral Puebloan dwellings and have been inhabited by Navajo for centuries since their return from the forced exile at Bosque Redondo in 1868. The painting Indian Ghost Dance, before the Battle of Wounded Knee, created in 1891. The Ghost Dance was a spiritual movement that promised the resurrection of the dead and the restoration of the indigenous world. The U.S. government banned the practice, and its conflict with authorities resulted in the Wounded Knee Massacre of December 1890. Front Street in Dodge City around 1880, with a sign proclaiming that the carrying of firearms was strictly forbidden. This image captures the central contradiction of Dodge City, a town with a reputation for extreme violence that simultaneously tried to impose order and attract families and investment to fuel its continued growth. A photograph from the Wounded Knee Massacre in December 1890 in South Dakota. The massacre, in which American soldiers killed between 250 and 300 Lakota men, women, and children, symbolically represented the end of the Indian Wars in the United States. The image of frozen bodies is among the most disturbing in American history. Portrait of Bull Half-White, also known as Curly, a Crow scout for General George Armstrong Custer in traditional dress and hairstyle. Curly was one of the few survivors of Little Bighorn, having escaped before the final combat. His testimony was controversial, but offered one of the few first-hand perspectives of the battle. The Bisbee Stage Tomb between 1885 and 1888. The Bisbee Massacre occurred in December 1883, when 5 outlaws attempted to rob the Goldwater and Castaneda exchange house and killed 5 innocent civilians. The criminals were captured, tried, and publicly hanged in Tombstone in March 1884 before a large crowd. Buddy Timmons rides Jack Dempsey, a bronco horse, at Cheyenne Frontier Days in 1910. Cheyenne Frontier Days, founded in 1897, is the largest outdoor rodeo in the world and one of the most iconic events of American cowboy culture. The event celebrates Wild West traditions and draws visitors from around the entire world. The Barroom Saloon in Charleston, Arizona, in 1885. Charleston was a town neighboring Tombstone, founded to supply the region's silver mines. Like many satellite towns of major mining centers, Charleston disappeared quickly when the silver vein was exhausted, becoming a ghost town lost to the desert of the Southwest. A hunting party poses in 1890 on State Street in downtown Santa Barbara, California. This photograph, from the digital archives of the Santa Barbara Historical Museum, captures an everyday aspect of late 19th century Californian life when hunting was still a common activity even in the larger established towns. Loggers from the Crow's Nest Pass Lumber Co. in a log jam on Bull River, British Columbia, around 1910 to 1914. The British Columbia timber industry was one of the most important in North America, supplying lumber for the rapidly expanding cities of the entire Pacific region during the early 20th century. Arizona John Burke, photographed in 1890. John M. Burke was Buffalo Bill's most talented publicity agent for decades, responsible for the enormous worldwide success of the Wild West show. His skill in generating press coverage and public excitement was fundamental in making William Cody a true global entertainment phenomenon. Mountain man Jim Baker, adopted by the Shoshone tribe and known as the Red-Haired Shoshone, photographed around 1883 in Colorado. Baker was one of the most colorful mountain men of the American West, working for decades as a guide, trapper, and interpreter in the Rocky Mountains and across the adjacent frontier plains. View of camp at Hidden Wood Creek, South Dakota, during Custer's Black Hills expedition of 1874. This expedition, organized ostensibly for scientific and military purposes, discovered gold in the Black Hills, triggering a gold rush that violated the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty and precipitated the war that killed Custer in 1876. On July 14, 1882, Johnny Ringo was found dead in a thicket in the Arizona Territory, seated against a tree with a gunshot wound to the head. His death remains a historical mystery. Was it suicide, murder by Wyatt Earp or Doc Holliday, or by some unknown party? The debate continues among Wild West historians today. 5 members of the Wild Bunch, around 1892. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid's Wild Bunch was one of the last and most famous outlaw gangs of the Wild West. The group specialized in bank and train robberies in Wyoming and Utah before fleeing to South America to escape the relentless Pinkerton detectives. Doc Holliday, photographed in 1879 in Prescott, Arizona. John Henry Holliday was a dentist, professional gambler, and gunfighter who became one of the most fascinating figures of the Wild West. Tubercular from a young age, Holliday lived under constant threat of imminent death and developed a complete disregard for danger. Cowboys enjoying a well-earned lunch after long days driving cattle. The life of cowboys was one of hard work, long hours in the saddle, and nights in the open air. Rest and meal times were oases of comfort in an exhausting routine that we romanticize today, but which was physically devastating in actual practice. General George Crook portrayed in Arizona with two of his Apache scouts, Dutchy and Alchesay, in 1886. Crook was one of the most respected American generals in southwestern campaigns and was known for treating the Apache with relative respect. Geronimo surrendered to Crook before changing his mind and fleeing again. Members of the Apache tribe outside their wickiup in Arizona in 1880. Wickiups were temporary dwellings made of branches, grass, and brush, adapted to the nomadic lifestyle of the Apache. The Apache were among the most adaptable and resistant peoples of the American Southwest, surviving in some of the continent's most inhospitable terrain. Duncan MacDonald and his wife, of the Flathead Nation, photographed in Montana between 1901 and 1911 by N.A. Forsyth. The Montana Historical Society collection preserves this portrait of a Salish couple during a period of profound transformation for the indigenous nations of the American Northwest, forced to adapt to reservation life. A large dog and men with rifles in a hunting or guard scene. This image captures the constant presence of weapons and animals in everyday Wild West life, where the ability to hunt and defend oneself was a matter of survival for settlers and town dwellers alike on the ever-shifting and demanding American frontier. Sitting Bull was shot and killed on December 15, 1890, by Indian policeman Bull Head, or possibly Red Tomahawk, during an attempted arrest at his cabin. The Ghost Dance movement had frightened authorities who feared a Lakota uprising. Sitting Bull's death precipitated the massacre at Wounded Knee just 2 weeks later. Annie Oakley shooting an apple placed on her dog's head in the early 1920s when she was approximately 60 years old. This image captures the extraordinary precision maintained by the legendary sharpshooter even in advanced age. Her dog, apparently indifferent to the risk involved, placed complete trust in his famous owner, Chief Crow Plenty Coues, photographed around 1908. One of the most influential Crow leaders of the late 19th century, Plenty Coues strategically used his alliance with Americans to preserve the lands and cultural identity of the Crow people. In 1921, he represented all indigenous nations at the Unknown Soldier ceremony. Belle Starr, known as the Bandit Queen, frequently displayed her guns for everyone to see. If she wanted, her voluminous Victorian-era dresses could have easily concealed her pistols, but she preferred to show that she was armed. Belle was tried for horse theft and sentenced to 6 months in federal prison in 1883. Robert Ford, the man who killed Jesse James. Ford approached James while feigning loyalty, planning his death in exchange for immunity and the government reward. When he shot James in the back in 1882, he was called a cowardly assassin by the American public, which paradoxically viewed James himself as a romantic folk hero. Heck Thomas, one of the famous 3 guardsmen of the Oklahoma Guard, photographed in 1900. Thomas, along with Bill Tillman and Chris Madsen, formed the trio of lawmen who eliminated the last great outlaw gangs of Indian Territory during the 1890s, including Bill Doolan's gang that had terrorized the region. The Arizona Club, around 1907, was one of the first permanent buildings in Las Vegas, Nevada. The Arizona Club was a saloon and nightclub serving the railroad construction community in the Nevada desert. Las Vegas at that time was little more than a railroad station in the middle of the arid Mojave Desert. Sam Bass, the famous train robber, photographed at far left, with his gang in the 1870s in Texas. Bass was killed by Texas Rangers on his 27th birthday in Round Rock, Texas, in July 1878, after being betrayed by a member of his own gang. He became a popular hero in Texas folklore, celebrated in songs and stories. View of Leadville, Colorado, around 1879. Leadville was one of the world's largest silver mining fields, attracting such figures as Doc Holliday and Oscar Wilde, who made a famous visit to the mines in 1882. The town grew explosively in the late 1870s and temporarily became the second largest city in Colorado. Quanah Parker, the last chief of the Comanches, photographed in Oklahoma around 1890. Quanah Parker became a prosperous rancher and active defender of indigenous rights after the Comanche surrender in 1875. A personal friend of President Theodore Roosevelt, he was one of the most successful mediators between indigenous and American cultures. Governor Eusebius and Sheriff Louis of the Acoma Pueblo in New Mexico, 1886. Acoma, or Sky City, is one of the oldest continuously inhabited settlements in North America, with more than 1,000 years of history. The Acoma Pueblo resisted both Spanish and American conquests, maintaining their community and cultural identity. Member of the Stoney First Nation, guide Samson Beaver, with his wife Leah and daughter Frances Louise, photographed in 1907 by Mary Sheffer. Sheffer was an American botanist and photographer who explored the Canadian Rockies and was one of the first women to conduct scientific expeditions through the remarkable mountain region. The Oriental Saloon in Tombstone, around 1881. The Oriental was one of the most elegant and well-known saloons in Tombstone, where figures like Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday were regular patrons. Earp held a business partnership in the establishment during the turbulent period leading up to the OK Corral gunfight. Photograph from George A. Custer's Black Hills expedition of 1874. This military expedition, by confirming the presence of gold in the Black Hills, triggered a gold rush that violated the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty. The inevitable conflict that followed culminated in the Battle of Little Bighorn and the death of Custer himself. The Pony Express riders, clockwise from upper left, Billy Richardson, Johnny Fry, Gus Cliff, and Charlie Cliff. The Pony Express operated from April 1860 to October 1861, delivering mail between Missouri and California in 10 days. Despite its short existence, it became one of the most legendary symbols of the American West. Little Wound, Oglala Lakota leader, photographed in 1890. Little Wound was an important Oglala chief who participated in several battles against the American Army before signing the 1868 treaty. He later became one of the principal spokesmen of the Sioux people in councils with the American government in Washington. George W. Titsworth, a Colorado lawman, photographed around 1909. Titsworth represented the new generation of Wild West lawmen who replaced the famous gunfighters with more formally trained law enforcement professionals as frontier towns transformed into established cities with functional institutions and regular governance. Sam Johns and his dog outside their property cabin near Flathead Lake, Montana, in 1893. Flathead Lake, located in northwestern Montana, was a very remote region in the late 19th century. Settlers like Johns lived in near-complete isolation, depending entirely on themselves and the land for their survival. A group of men outside a building in Siskiyou County, California, around 1890. Siskiyou County in Northern California, near the Oregon border, was a region of gold mining and timber that attracted rugged settlers and adventurers during the decades of American westward expansion into the far northern reaches of the state.